The morning I drove home from St. Catherine's Medical Center, I kept one hand on the wheel and the other pressed flat against my ribs, as if I could hold myself together through sheer pressure. 3 weeks. I had been gone exactly 3 weeks, 12 days in the hospital recovering from cardiac bypass surgery, then 11 more at my brother Frank's place in Tucson because my cardiologist said I shouldn't be alone during the first phase of recovery. Frank and his wife Linda had been good to me. They fed me soup, made me walk slow laps around the block every afternoon, and didn't let me lift anything heavier than a coffee mug. I was 64 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I had genuinely needed taking care of. I remember thinking, as I turned off the interstate toward Millbrook, that I was ready to be home. My house, my chair, my kitchen, my quiet. What I was not ready for was what I found when I got there. My name is Richard. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer before I retired at 62. I own a 4-bedroom colonial on Ashgrove Lane that my late wife Carol and I bought in 1997, the year our son Daniel started middle school and our daughter Patrice was still young enough to think the backyard was an entire universe. Carol passed 8 years ago breast cancer, fast and merciless, and I have lived in that house alone ever since. It is mine in every sense of the word. My name on the deed, my sweat in the garden, my memory in every corner. Daniel is 40 now. He works in logistics, married a woman named Brooke 6 years ago, and they have a daughter, my granddaughter Lily, who just turned 4. I love Lily in the way that only grandfathers can completely, without condition, without the complicated weight that comes with raising your own children. I see her twice a month when things are good, or I used to. Daniel and Brooke had been living in a rental apartment in Carterville, about 20 minutes from my house. The apartment was fine. Small, but fine. 2 bedrooms, a decent neighborhood. They had been talking for 2 years about buying a place of their own, and I had offered more than once to help with a down payment when the right house came along. I wanted them to have something solid, something theirs. I did not invite them to move into mine. I want to be precise about that, because in the weeks that followed what I came home to, there was a great deal of revision happening, memory being quietly rewritten, words being reinterpreted, intentions being redefined. So, let me be precise. I never told Daniel and Brooke they could move into my house while I was recovering. I never suggested it. I never implied it. What I said, on the phone the night before my surgery, was that I would appreciate it if they checked in on the house while I was gone, watered the plants in the sunroom, brought in the mail, made sure nothing was wrong. That is what I said. I have the text messages to prove it. Here is what I found when I pulled into my driveway on a Tuesday afternoon in October. There were 2 cars in my driveway that were not mine. Daniel's gray Subaru and a silver sedan I did not recognize. Through the front window, I could see the flicker of a television that I did not remember leaving on. There were children's shoes, small pink sneakers arranged on my front porch next to a pair of women's boots I had never seen before. I sat in my car for a full minute, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Daniel and Brooke were inside, having lunch, planning to leave before I arrived. Maybe they had misread the day I was coming home. I went inside. The living room was rearranged. My reading chair, a brown leather recliner that Carol gave me for my 55th birthday, had been pushed against the wall to make room for a large sectional sofa that I had never seen before in my life. Lily's toys were spread across the floor. On my coffee table, there were fashion magazines, a half-eaten package of crackers, and a coffee mug that was not mine, leaving a ring on the wood. I stood in my own living room and felt like a guest. Brooke came out of the kitchen first. She was wearing a bathrobe. At 2:30 in the afternoon, she stopped when she saw me, and her expression did something complicated, surprise, then a flash of something that might have been guilt, then a practiced smile that settled over her face, like a mask being lowered into place. "Richard, you're home early." I was not home early. I was home on the exact day I had told Daniel I was coming home. "Where is my son?" I asked. "He's at work. He'll be home around 6. She said it easily, naturally, the way a wife says her husband will be home for dinner in the house where they live. "Can I get you something? You must be exhausted from the drive." I looked around my living room again. I looked at the sectional sofa. I looked at the toys. I looked at the coffee mug on my coffee table and the ring it had left on the wood. "Brooke," I said carefully, "how long have you been staying here?" She tilted her head slightly, as if the question surprised her. "We moved most of our things in the second week you were gone. Daniel thought it would be better if someone was actually here, keeping an eye on things, rather than just coming by. And with Lily, it's easier to have space." She paused. "We've been talking about it for a while, actually. It just made sense." I noticed she did not say, "I hope that's okay." I noticed she did not say, "We should have asked you first." I noticed she did not say sorry. I asked to see the rest of the house. She followed me, still in the bathrobe, talking about how they had tried to keep everything tidy, and how Lily loved the backyard, and how it had actually been really good for her to have more space to run around. Her voice had a quality I can only describe as preemptive, like someone who has already prepared their argument before the other person has raised an objection. I walked down the hall, toward the back of the house. My home office was the room at the end of the hall. I designed it myself, had the built-in bookshelves installed the year after Carol died, spent probably 200 weekends in that room reading and drafting and thinking. It was the room where I kept 30 years of project files and Carol's photographs and the drafting table that had been my father's. It was the most private room in the house, and everyone who knew me understood that. The door was closed. There was a small handwritten note taped to it that said, "Lily's room, please knock." I stood there and read that note 3 times. Then I opened the door. My bookshelves were still there, but most of my books were gone, stacked in uneven piles against the wall to make room for a white crib, a changing table, a pink fabric storage unit shaped like a castle, and approximately 40 stuffed animals. My father's drafting table, which was 100 years old, oak, irreplaceable, had been pushed into the corner and covered with a fitted sheet to use as a surface for Lily's art supplies. There was finger paint on the sheet. There were crayon marks on the wall. My 30 years of project files were gone. Carol's photographs were gone. My father's drafting table had finger paint on it. I could not speak. I stood in the doorway of what had been my office, and I genuinely could not form words. "We thought it would be better for Lily to have her own room," Brooke said from behind me. She wasn't sleeping well in the bedroom with us, and this room was just being used for storage, mostly. I turned around and looked at her. "This room," I said, and my voice came out very quiet, which I have learned over 64 years means I am far more upset than when I am loud, was not being used for storage. This room contained my professional archives, 31 years of engineering files, irreplaceable documents, photographs of my wife, my father's drafting table. "Your files are in the garage," she said quickly. "We put everything in labeled boxes. We were very careful. Where are Carol's photographs?" A pause. "The garage, with the boxes." I thought about Carol's photographs sitting in labeled boxes in the garage, which is not climate-controlled, in October, in Ohio. And the drafting table? It's still here. We just covered it. There is finger paint on a 100-year-old piece of furniture, Brooke. She didn't say anything to that. I went to the garage. The boxes were there, stacked along the back wall with reasonable care. I will admit that. Someone had written on the outside of each one, in black marker, "Files, Books, Photos, Misc." The photos box was on the bottom of a stack. The garage concrete was cold and slightly damp. I opened the photos box and found Carol's pictures, wrapped in newspaper, which was better than nothing. But they had been in frames on my shelves for 8 years, and now they were in a box in a cold garage. And I had not been asked, and I had not agreed, and no one had thought to mention it to me before I drove home from heart surgery to find my office turned into a nursery. I went back inside. Brooke was in the kitchen, making tea, moving around with the ease of someone who had been doing this for weeks, which, of course, she had. "Where is the woman from the silver car?" I asked. She looked up. "What woman?" "There are 2 cars in my driveway. One is Daniel's. The other is a silver sedan. Whose is it?" A moment passed. A very specific kind of moment where someone is deciding how to package information they know you are not going to receive well. "That's my mother's," she said. "She's been helping with Lily while Daniel and I are at work. She was going to head home today, actually, but your mother is here. She's in the guest room. She's been a huge help with... She is staying in my guest room. Richard, she watches Lily during the day so we don't have to pay for daycare, which has actually been... Brooke. I set my car keys down on the counter and looked at her directly. I want to make sure I understand the situation completely. While I was in the hospital recovering from open-heart surgery, you moved your family into my house without asking me. You converted my office, which contained irreplaceable personal and professional items, into a child's bedroom. You moved my belongings, including photographs of my deceased wife, into the garage, and you also invited your mother to move into my guest room. I paused. Have I missed anything? She had the grace to look uncomfortable. It sounds harsh when you say it like that. I'm curious how it sounds less harsh when said another way. She set down her mug. Daniel thought, I would like to speak with Daniel. He won't be home until... I'm going to call him now, I said. And while I do that, I would appreciate it if you asked your mother to come downstairs. I called Daniel from the back porch, standing in my own yard, looking at Lily's plastic play structure that had been set up over the flower bed where Carol used to grow dahlias. He answered on the second ring, and before I could say anything beyond Daniel, he said, Dad, you're home. Look, I know this is a lot to walk into, and I should have talked to you before. I know that. Yes, I said. You should have. It just happened fast. Brooke and I had been talking about needing more space, and then you needed surgery, and it seemed like the logical... Daniel. I kept my voice level. Your wife's mother is sleeping in my guest room. Your daughter's toys are all over my living room floor. My office has been converted without my knowledge or permission. Carol's photographs are in boxes in the garage. Silence on his end. Mom's pictures are in the garage? In boxes. On the concrete floor. Another silence. Longer this time. That was Dad. I didn't know she did that with the photos. I told her to leave your office alone, but she didn't. I'll talk to her. Daniel, I don't need you to talk to her. I need to understand what the plan is here. Are you under the impression that you live in my house now? He didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. We thought it made financial sense. We'd been paying rent, and you have all this space, and eventually we'd take over the mortgage, and I stopped him there. I have never offered you this house. I have never suggested you take over anything. This house is mine, and it was not available. Dad, I'm not angry, Daniel. That was not entirely true, but I was trying to have a conversation rather than a confrontation. I am telling you clearly that this is my home, that I did not agree to this arrangement, and that we need to talk tonight about what happens next. In person. Can you be here by 6? He said yes. He said he was sorry. He said it in the way people say sorry when they hope the word is large enough to cover something without them having to move it. I went back inside to meet Brooke's mother. Her name was Diane. She was in her mid-60s, well-dressed, with the calm assurance of a woman who is accustomed to getting what she wants through quiet persistence rather than direct confrontation. She shook my hand and told me she'd heard so much about me and that my home was beautiful. She said it the way people say it when they have already made themselves comfortable in a place and are gently indicating that they find it suitable. How long have you been staying here, Diane? I asked. About 10 days, she said pleasantly. Brooke needed the help, and the drive from my place in Denison is 45 minutes each way, so it just made more sense to stay. Did anyone ask you to leave your home a 45-minute drive away to come stay in mine? She looked at me with an expression of patient tolerance. Daniel and Brooke suggested it, yes. Daniel and Brooke don't own this house, I said, not loudly, just clearly. The three of us sat in my rearranged living room, and I looked at the sectional sofa that was not mine, and the toys on the floor, and the coffee ring on my table, and I thought about Carol's photographs in the garage, and my father's drafting table with finger paint on it, and I understood that something had shifted while I was gone, that while I was lying in a hospital bed with my chest cracked open trying to stay alive, someone had decided that the life I'd built in this house was available for redistribution. I was not going to allow that. Daniel arrived at 6:15. He looked tired and younger than his age at the same time. The way men in their late 30s look when they've been carrying something heavy and are hoping someone will finally tell them they can put it down. He hugged me carefully, because of my chest, and said again that he was sorry. Lily toddled in from the kitchen and grabbed my hand and said, "Grandpa." And I felt the familiar, complicated love of it, the way she had absolutely nothing to do with any of this, and yet was entirely in the middle of it. I put her to bed myself, actually, that night. Read her the book about the Bear family finding their house, because that was the one she picked off the shelf, and I did not miss the irony. When she fell asleep, I sat for a moment in my old office chair that had been pushed against the wall next to the crib, and I looked at what used to be my room, and I thought about Carol, and about the kind of man I had tried to be for 40 years, and about what it means to let people take things from you quietly, in increments, until you look up one day and realize you have lost the whole sum. Then I went back downstairs. I sat across from Daniel and Brooke at my own kitchen table, and Diane had the good sense to make herself absent, and I told them what I was going to say clearly and without raising my voice. I said, "This is my house. My name is on the deed, and it was never offered to anyone as a residence." I said, "Moving in without asking was a serious violation of my trust, and converting my office without permission was a deeper one." I said, "I understand that there were financial pressures, and I have some sympathy for that. But sympathy does not retroactively become consent." I said, "Carol's photographs needed to be brought back inside that night, not tomorrow. That night." And then I said the part I had been thinking about all afternoon. I said, I was going to give them 30 days to find another living arrangement. That was not a negotiation. It was a timeline. I would help them with a deposit on a rental if needed, because I was their father, and I was not trying to punish them. I was trying to be clear. But at the end of 30 days, this house would be as I had left it, my office restored, my belongings returned, my home mine again. Brooke started to speak, and Daniel put his hand on her arm. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry. I should have asked. I don't know what I was thinking." "I think you were thinking it would be easier to ask forgiveness than permission," I said. "I think you assumed I would come home, find you settled in, find Lily happy, and not have the heart to disrupt it. And I want you to understand that you were almost right. Looking at Lily tonight, I almost said nothing, almost told myself it was fine." He looked at the table. "But it isn't fine," I said, "and allowing it to continue wouldn't be kindness. It would be me teaching you that my boundaries disappear when you pressure them hard enough. I don't want to teach you that." Brooke was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, in a smaller voice than I had heard from her before, "I convinced him it would be okay. I told him you'd be happy to have Lily around, and that it made financial sense, and that we could fix up the room back after." She paused. "I shouldn't have pushed him, and I shouldn't have let my mother come without asking you." That was the most honest thing she had said to me since I walked through the door. I appreciated it. The next morning I called my attorney, not because I believed it would come to a legal dispute, but because I believe in documenting things clearly. I also had a contractor come look at the crayon marks on the wall of my office and give me an estimate for repainting. I did not tell Daniel about this at first, but I did keep the estimate. I brought Carol's photographs back inside that same night. I unwrapped each one myself, standing in the kitchen, checking the frames for damage. Most were fine. One frame had a small crack along the bottom corner where it had shifted against another in the box. It was a small thing, but I felt it in a way that was disproportionate to the damage, the way small things often hurt more than large ones, because they reveal what was being handled carelessly. I put the photographs back on my shelves in the office, around Lily's crib, which still occupied most of the room. It looked strange, my engineering books and Carol's pictures sharing space with stuffed animals and a pink castle storage unit, but I wanted them back where they belonged even before the room was fully restored. The 30 days passed in the way difficult periods do, slowly at first, then in a rush. Brooke found them a 2-bedroom apartment in Grover Park, newer building, good school district, about 12 minutes from my house. I wrote a check for the deposit and first month's rent, as I had said I would. Daniel helped me move things back into the office on a Saturday in November, just the two of us. And we didn't talk much, but we worked well together, the way we always had, when we were doing something physical and concrete. He reassembled my bookshelves. He carried boxes in from the garage. He moved my father's drafting table back to its place by the window and stood looking at the faint smear of pink finger paint on the corner for a long moment. "I'll get that off," he said. "I've already looked into it," I said. "Mild solvent, careful application. It'll come clean." He nodded. Then, "Dad, I want you to know that I understand now what I did. Not just the logistics of it, what it actually meant." I looked at him. "You came home from surgery," he said. "You'd just had your chest opened up, and you came home to find that someone had decided your life, your space, your stuff, your privacy was just available. Like it didn't matter. Like you didn't matter." He stopped. "That's what I did to you. And I'm sorry." I had been his father for 40 years. I had coached his little league team and driven him to college orientation and sat in the front row at his wedding. I had been present for all the ordinary and extraordinary moments of his life with the consistency that I believed was the most important thing a father could offer. And I had not always been perfect at it. I had been too rigid sometimes, too absent in the years when Carol was sick, too focused on work when I should have been focused on him. But I had tried. And I believed, standing in my restored office with my son on a November afternoon, that he knew I had tried. "I know you're sorry," I said. "I believe you mean it. Do you think he stopped? Is it going to be okay between us?" "Yes," I said. "It's going to be okay. But it's going to be a certain kind of okay. The kind that comes after something real was broken and something real was repaired. Not the kind where it just gets smoothed over and we pretend it didn't happen." He nodded. I could tell he understood the difference. Diane left the week before they moved out. She shook my hand again on her way to her car and said she hoped there were no hard feelings. I told her I appreciated her honesty in our earlier conversation and left it at that. There are people in the world who will walk into your space and rearrange it and never understand why you objected, and spending energy trying to make them understand is its own kind of loss. I chose to spend that energy elsewhere. I spent it, mostly, on Lily. She didn't understand any of it, of course. She was 4. She knew Grandpa's house and Grandpa's backyard and the book about the Bear family and the way I always let her have a second cookie when her parents weren't looking. The disruption of moving from my house to their apartment was a thing that passed through her in a week and left no visible mark. The way children process change with a grace that adults have long since lost. She still comes over twice a month. She still runs straight to the backyard when she arrives, past the flower bed where I've started growing dahlias again. Carol's variety, ordered from a specialty nursery in Oregon, planted in October so they'd bloom in summer. Lily likes to help water them, which mostly means she floods one corner and leaves the rest. And I let her, because some things are not about the dahlias. There is a conversation I need to have with Daniel, still pending, about what will eventually happen to this house. Not because I believe he has designs on it, I don't think he does. Not anymore, but because I believe clarity is a form of respect, and I want to be respectful to both of us. I have an updated estate plan drafted by my attorney that I am going to share with him when the time feels right. Not to threaten or to warn, but because I have learned, at 64, that the things left unspoken have a way of filling the space between people until the silence becomes the relationship. I do not want that. I want what I had at the beginning, a son who knows where he stands, a granddaughter who comes through my front door like she owns the place in the best possible sense, a house that is mine and that I choose, freely and with intention, to share. Some evenings I sit in my reading chair back in its place by the front window, and I look out at Ash Grove Lane, and I think about the version of this story that could have gone differently. The version where I came home from surgery, found the situation, said nothing, and let it calcify into permanent arrangement. I think about that version of myself, the one who would have traded his privacy for peace, his boundaries for belonging, his home for the comfort of not having a difficult conversation. I am glad I am not that man. Carol used to say that the hardest conversations are the ones that are most worth having, that the discomfort of clarity was almost always smaller than the suffering of avoidance. She was right about most things. She was right about that. The dahlias won't bloom until July. I have already decided that when they do, I'm going to cut the first bunch and bring them to Daniel and Brooke's apartment. And we are going to sit around their kitchen table, in their home and drink coffee, and watch Lily terrorize the living room and be, as imperfectly and honestly as we can manage, a family. That is what I came home for. That is what I was not willing to give up.